The free school lunch program has become a rolling disaster for the government. It's gone on far too long. Hundreds of jobs are being lost and companies have gone belly up. Lance the Boyle, I say, can it and redesign it through a fresh set of eyes, start again and feed those most in need. Welcome to the program.
Are we paying these people to front up, or are we paying them to fly to Wellington to eat their lunch? Should you really lose your career for refusing to take part in a 90-minute lesson about Māori culture? This government doesn't actually have any idea how to get economic growth. Show us what you made of, Prime Minister.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, you're with the Editor-in-Chief. Welcome evening, everybody. I'm Duncan Garner, and please subscribe. First thing I'll always say is please subscribe. It helps us stay around. Now, this has been the government's biggest policy failure, and still weeks on, the fallout continues. Feeding the kids in schools on the cheap has shown us that cost-cutting has affected the front line. Jobs are at stake. The government may have saved $130 million, but for what? Such bad and ongoing poor publicity. Was it worth it? And this is now about more than food and schools program. This goes to the heart of whether this government looks competent or not. So let's go.
It's the Slam Dunk.
At the risk of sounding like a miserable Grinch, and someone has to put this woefully managed policy out of its misery, surely. For a start, this was Labour's food and schools program that this government attempted to do on the cheap. And it's magnificently backfired, hasn't it? There is no two ways about it. And these sorts of failures become bigger than just a failure to feed kids in schools. It becomes a monument, if you like, to government incompetence and the inability to do something. It affects people's perception of the entire government. It's why weak ministers are moved on by prime ministers, because they begin to infect the whole of government, and prime ministers simply have to be ruthless on this space. On school lunches, companies have gone to the wall over this. Hundreds of jobs face being lost. The truth is, this government, in its desperate attempt to save money everywhere, got this wrong. It couldn't be done on such a shoestring budget without the victims piling up. Either that, or the Education Ministry didn't do their due diligence on the providers, or everyone was too scared to speak up and tell Seymour it couldn't be done for the money he was offering. Official Information Act requests show there were concerns put on the table, but they were largely overlooked and everyone tried to make it work when the whistle should have been blown earlier. And concerns should have been taken seriously. David Seymour can tell us it's 99% working because meals were delivered on time. Problem is, the main company behind it has gone into liquidation. And it owes $14 million and it can't do school meals for $3 per day per child. Labor was paying more than $8, and while that may have been too high, clearly, $3 has proved simply too damn cheap. And the pile-up has ensued, and it's ugly. Here's my take. Can the whole damn thing and go back to the drawing board. I'll be labelled miserable for this, but someone's got to say it. We were feeding far too many kids who, quite frankly, come from families with a history of making their own lunch. And once you start giving something away for free, the masses line up and become entitled, and then we're in trouble. That's where we're heading. We all went to school with a basic sandwich, piece of fruit, and maybe a biscuit if you're lucky. You played rugby on the concrete and all that sort of thing. It was normal. What sort of society have we created where middle-class kids now expect a decent buttered chicken and naan bread for lunch? And when they don't get it, and they don't get it on time, they have a right to moan and groan and shout, "Where's my free hot lunch?" God, obesity is New Zealand's problem, largely. Not being underfed, it's being overfed. We eat too much of the wrong stuff. And our kids are about third in the world in obesity stats. I say elections should return home from playing backyard cricket to deal to the issues on the front porch and redesign this program. Richard Prebble says, just give the money to the schools themselves and let them come up with a local solution. He's nailed it. There and then, he's nailed it. After all, wasn't tomorrow's schools all about logical solutions to local problems? But cancel Jacinda Ardern's lunch and schools program. Wasn't theirs anyway, which David Seymour has made a meal of. He had good intentions in trying to save money, but in truth they tried to save too much. And it's backfired. And the companies doing this have been squeezed. And good people are now out of a job. Feed those who really need it. Tell the others to follow the advice of the Prime Minister. Have a look at this.
Of course, if you don't like the food, ultimately, you can make a Marmite sandwich and put an apple in a lunch bag, as I've said before. That's quite possible. It's how we all went to school with our own lunches in the day.
And let's stop being so snobby. There's nothing wrong with the Marmite sandwich. I mean, maybe his delivery and timing and lack of humour didn't help, but the message is right. Personal responsibility still matters, especially when the government is struggling with no money. They've got no money because our economy has stalled. We predominantly know the kids in the schools who struggle to feed themselves. And the central Wellington approach, which is, central government must have the answer to this, to feed as many people as possible, it hasn't worked. We need to admit that, and David Seymour must suck it up, except his cost-cutting went too far, and it hasn't worked. It's a tricky one for Luxon, given that Seymour is about to become the Deputy Prime Minister and his Nationals coalition, one of the coalition partners. But Luxon needs to get home and stop the bleeding of this policy, of this issue, because while it's not a game changer either way, really, it just might start to be. And It looks really messy, and people decide, basically that the entire government's incompetent as a result. And I think it's at that point now. Luxon must stop the rot and attempt to draw a line under it. This is what a Prime Minister must do, show leadership. I would take the portfolio off Seymour. Take it off him and give it to a fresh set of eyes to oversee and roll out. Make it totally different, because Seymour now can't see the wood for the trees and isn't independent enough to make the right decisions here. He tried to save money, and he did. But in the process, he's proved that the cost-cutting has impacted those on the front line big time. It's impacted kids, it's impacted workers, it's impacted public servants, it's impacted a lot of people. Because the damage in the pile-up is not just inside government. Outside contractors are going under. People are owed money. I don't know if you could design this sort of train wreck if you tried, but it's the reality. Former Tony Blair spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, used to say if a minister is still in the headlines 11 days after a scandal breaks, then he or she must be chopped, because by then it's taken hold and you lose control of the narrative and the damage sets in. We are well past day 11. Stop the program. Either give the money to the schools and say, hey, you find your own solutions. You know best. You know your community. And buy pizza. We don't care, whatever you want to do. Or if they must keep control of it, then redesign it to the schools and the kids that need it most. But stop feeding those who can feed themselves. It's largesse that we simply don't have. And Luxon must somehow grow a spine and show as much interest in his own country and his own backyard as he does when he goes overseas. And call Seymour in and tell him the bad news. Give the portfolio to someone else. Let Seymour get back to whatever else he's doing and become the Deputy Prime Minister, because that's going to take a bit more responsibility. Sure, it's a whack in the face, but if Luxon is going to sack ministers for not performing like Melissa Lee or the former minister who crossed the line by physically touching a staff member, then surely Seymour, quite frankly, must take responsibility for a cost-cutting exercise that has backfired disastrously. Own it, step aside, carry on with your other portfolios and step up into the responsibility of Deputy Prime Minister. But leadership sometimes involves saying, I got this wrong. It's a sign of strength, not weakness. But only Luxon can force this issue, because sometimes Prime Ministers need to deal to the family inside the tent. And we, the public, expect them to, and we quite like it when they do. Draw a line under it, draw a line on the sand, and say enough's enough. I'm the boss, it's not good enough. And if anything, Luxon needs to use this and make it work in his favour. By all accounts, he can be ruthless. So here's some issue requiring some leadership and the PM with the balls to do it. So it's all yours, Prime Minister. I've given you the play sheet. Are you up for it? We are waiting and we are watching. Welcome home, sir.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, so the Taxpayers Union has been watching this unfold in the last few weeks. The complete disaster. Jordan Williams is the Executive Director of the Taxpayers Union. Joins us now. Jordan, g'day, nice to see you.
G'day, Duncan.
What did Alistair Campbell say? 11 days, if you're still involved in a scandal after 11 days, then you should be chopped as a minister. I mean, this has gone on and on and on, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You look at the Taxpayer Union polling. We don't tend to release the time series data publicly, but the polling that we make available to our larger donors, or people that give us $1,000 or more a year, shows the popularity, or favourable, unfavourable, over time for the party leaders. And David Seymour has really come down hard. And it looks to be, it's either school lunches or treaty principles, you would assume. So it is certainly costing. Of course, the irony is, as Richard Prebble pointed out in his piece in the Herald this week, that this isn't an ACT policy. This was a policy that Labor put into place on we're gonna shout the kids' lunches. Parents love it because it takes a chore off them. And then Nats say they sign up, no, don't worry, we'll keep them. And then it's somehow been added on to David Seymour's plate, excuse the pun, where he's expected to save money and sort it out. And you know what? Saving money has meant that the lunches apparently don't taste as good. And you get, frankly, banana stories from the likes of TVNZ, and I see the Hawke's Bay today jumped in the trough as well. Heading up to Nuhaka, a good little rural community just south of Gisborne, where apparently half the lunches are being thrown out because they apparently taste a bit bland. And you get the hippie school principal, and I'm not actually, what is astonishing about that story is that Hawke's Bay reporter for TVNZ is actually damn good, but has gone down the rabbit hole or into the pig's trough, excuse the pun here. And you get the bizarre stories, but the obvious questions not being asked. The obvious questions being, number one, is it really a problem if, goodness forbid, the lunches taste so bad that the kids asking their parents to make them a Marmite sandwich instead. Is that really a problem? Is the
Yeah.
first thing.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
second is that maybe if half your lunches are being thrown away, as the teacher or principal at Nuhaka claims, maybe you should be ordering fewer of them.
Yeah.
But that would mean that TVNZ wouldn't get their free hit piece on the government or on David Seymour. But I mean, at the Taxpayers Union, we've had no shortage of things to do over the last few months. But we sort of put out a poll on our social media accounts asking, is it time to just scrap the school lunches? And the vast majority are saying, absolutely. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting that there is a cohort of kids that are going to school hungry because mum and dad aren't doing their job, or the poverty is so bad that they're unable to. However, we argue that the money should be targeted. This, frankly, lifestyle of teachers where they expect the lunch that they're having to taste good, or for Johnny and Sally to have a taxpayer-funded lunch, is I think reflective of a sense of entitlement that actually needs to be nipped in the bud when you've got a government that is spending $12 billion a year more than what it's bringing in, and we're borrowing off those kids' futures.
They have told us to change our ways in terms of what we earn and what we borrow and what we spend. We've all had to cut our cloth there. They need to as well. This is a reluctant policy for Seymour. It's a reluctant. I think he's been reluctant all the way through. This is where cost cutting has affected the front line. There's no doubt about it.
Well, he was pretty bullish. He said, "Oh, let me handle it."
Yeah, I thought it was a mistake.
He quite expected that. I mean, goodness gracious me, we are getting front page items because kids don't like their food.
Toughen up.
I mean, my 5-year-old, my other half expresses love through food. She is an incredible cook. It's I'm not blaming her for putting on weight the last few years, but she makes it bloody easy. My child has just, when mum comes to stay, he just is amazed with the olives that Zoe will hoe back and things like that. Even with Emily's amazing cooking, kids are fussy.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but the idea that the food's a bit bland from Nuhaka School and boo-hoo, and somehow that makes our 6 o'clock news. Like, these people need to get a grip. If it's that bad, get some salt and pepper.
Yeah. Mate, on Celebrity Treasure Island, I went for a month with rice and beans. And the salt was the big deal. Honestly, Jordan, the salt was the big deal. I reckon that Luxon should come home, say to Seymour, "This is not your business anymore, mate. Yeah, it's too tough. I'm gonna stand aside from this. You're gonna carry on."
Why would they take it on? I mean, why would Erica
cut
want
it?
I mean, it's such a
cut it.
It's it should be. But then, of course, what would happen is that Labour would say they deliberately ran it down to cut it, which is clearly not, it's clearly not the case.
Yeah.
But it comes back to fundamentals. Is it the government's role to feed kids, or is it the parents' role? And that is actually a legitimate discussion for the country to have, but our media seem unable to promote. You obviously a exception, but our particularly our state broadcasters are unable to trouble themselves with actually what is the fundamental question.
Yeah, I used to be a big believer in this as a parent's responsibility. So I've got a few kids, and I thought this is my mum did it, I've done it. We feed our kids, right? I've always thought that's our job. We bring them into this world, we look after them. And then a few years back, I decided, after being in America and seeing what they do there and some of the corporate sort of approach to feed food at lunchtime and things, I decided to think, we need to target those who you can't learn on an empty belly. You can't learn. So, and whether we like it or not, there's a whole cohort, what you said at the start of this interview, of kids that are going to school. A lot of them are fat and eating the wrong food, but a lot of them are just basically hungry. I believe that there is, like a welfare system, you've got to look after their bottom. Somehow they've got to learn, otherwise you get disastrous results. But we are feeding middle class kids whose families have a history of feeding them at school, and that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the argument that teachers make is that we shouldn't make little Johnny feel poor by supporting him. I mean, and therefore we should do it for everyone. That's a very, I don't accept that argument. The teachers know who is living in poverty, who really needs it. But this idea that there's some sort of grievance because the government food don't taste good enough is simply bananas. The irony of Nuhaka School is, of course, what they've replaced it with, if you believe their claims, is, it's sandwiches. It's bread and butter and presumably jam or Marmite.
What happened to that? What happened? I mean, I thought a whole bunch of snobs piled into Luxon on the Marmite sandwich comment. When I hear the Marmite sandwich comment, I mean, delivery and everything is questionable, but that's what we had. I remember going back to Stephen Howe's place, my best friend at primary school. We had toast and we had butter and we had peanut butter. That's what we had after school and at school. Nothing else.
Yeah, I want to put a question in next month's poll on this and just ask our get our pollsters to ask the 1,200 voters, or whatever they do, whose responsibility should it be, the parents or the taxpayer, the supplier lunch. But I'm not rejecting that. Of course, kids can't learn on an empty stomach, but it can't be that bad if, as you know, a low decile school like Nuhaka in the middle of nowhere is saying that majority of our kids are giving it to the pigs because it doesn't taste good enough. That kind of suggests to you that maybe this program isn't needed or should be more targeted.
What worries me is that kids are thinking in this age of everything's accessible by their device anyway, that they're going to get looked after, and we can't create a generation of people that expect to click their fingers and something turns up at the table. Even and I know Nuhaka, I know the area, and it's remote, and to be able to provide school lunches into Nuhaka, it's remarkable. We might as well, I take it they provide them in the Hokianga as well. And so I think we've gone too far, and we're feeding middle-class families who are used to feeding their kids. We've given them an excuse not to. And then the next generation will expect that, and the next generation, and then we're stuffed, because then we are truly a welfare state.
Yeah, I mean, you could. I mean, there are some countries that do provide school lunches, and and to do it properly,
Cultural.
and there is there's perhaps a cultural and also a cost associated with that. I mean, New Zealand, of course, used to have the old milk in schools, and you'd probably, from a nutritional point of view, that's probably much better bang for buck, giving every kid a little thing of milk every day. But it comes back to that this approach of this lunch isn't good enough, Johnny doesn't like it. Well, any parent will tell you kids are fussy, but if they're genuinely hungry, they'll eat it.
Yeah.
And the mere fact that they're not kind of illustrates the point. And this weird, New Zealand has a lot of problems right now. I'm not gilding the lily to say that we are in the biggest financial stuck since 1986.
Yeah. Yep.
Where New Zealand almost went bust. Things are, the lights on the dashboard are flashing, and instead we're consuming ourselves on something that actually is a distraction and is using. It's really nice that the media can beat up David Seymour with it, and it must be damn hard for ACT to have to swallow a dead rat. But then they open, One News is reporting on a fly apparently flying out of a meal, and it's fourth hand, this report of this fly, and which just does not make sense when you sort of string the logic together that the fly was sealed in and cooked and yet somehow flew out. But it's as the result of a friend told a family member, a family member told someone else that told a blogger, and then somehow TVNZ now picks it up as news. I'm sorry, but where are the adults running that newsroom? Because I see that in so many areas of public.
They left years ago. I can tell you what the answer is. They left years ago, and I've said this I've said this on this program.
They just refuse to do their
jobs.
jobs.
I've said this on this program. No, they are doing their job and they're biased, and they've got it in for Seymour. Because there's a narrative in these newsrooms that if you somehow go against that, they look strange at you, like, oh, you're a racist, or you support ACT, and it's not cool. You see, so there's a narrative in there, and they're all like-minded. I've been in these
Duncan,
places for 30 years.
I have a slightly different working theory on this. Not to defend the media, that's not my job. But I do think that part of it is actually generational. That there's no one in there, over 30, working on this stuff anymore. And it's a little bit like a lot of the nuts public policy we get out of that wants us all to ride on trains and buses and ride bikes to work, is that it's people so young they haven't yet had kids.
Yeah. No, you're right. And there's also they've got no markers of history, so they actually don't know what happened 20 years ago. So when I say something like, "Oh, well, this happened 20 years ago when Rodney Hyde showed this or whatever," they go, "Who's Rodney?"
Yeah, you see that a lot when there's flooding in New Zealand or something, and it's sort of portrayed as absolutely devastating. Like we've never had Cyclone Bowler or anything. Not to downplay the floods in Hawke's Bay, but you do. I remember the Rena running aground saying it's the worst maritime disaster in New Zealand. No, it's not.
What about the Wahine?
No, it's not. But that could also be. We don't have the mature sub-editors anymore in the newsrooms, but we also there's just fewer, frankly, adults.
We don't have grown-ups.
I think what we see on the TV is led by emotion far more now than actually a historical or intellectual understanding.
I think you're right. I think, and I've spoken about this on the podcast, I think there's almost a breathless shrill, and you just...
Isn't it funny? I run an organisation that we've part think tank, part sort of waste expose, and getting that we've been talking about. Literally, the meeting I'm going into is around a sort of research pipeline versus that sort of shrill government waste stuff that catches the big headlines. The media sort of have lost that self-awareness of what is the shrill, that is the sort of easy hits that are naturally emotive, versus actually the big bang stuff that actually matters. That's a bit harder work.
Yep, that's right. And I cut my teeth on this stuff as a young 21, 22, 23-year-old in Parliament from 95 onwards. It seems like such a long time ago, right? And Rodney Hyde had just turned up in Parliament, and he was sort of the waste buster, And some of the stories that we dug around and found out were just astonishing, because Parliament was a club, much more of a club back then, and you did not upset that club, and he did. And boy, some of Jenny Bloxham, who was a New Zealand First MP at the time, used her stamp warrant to register her private car, only $180 or something, but it was still. But people understand what that means.
Yeah, but there was much worse than that. Of course, you and I both know that there's some stuff that is still suppressed in relation to the worst example of that. And I don't. It's been a long time since I've looked at the wording of that order, so I better be careful not to. But it was outrageous. But I think that there are equally areas of government spending that are as bad, because it does really concern us at the Taxpayers Union the extent to which so much more of government spending is becoming dependent on race, and that government spending. It seems the media seem very reluctant to touch it.
They won't.
I don't think it's necessarily
Jordan, they won't
deliberate.
touch it.
I think it's a fear of being called out or accused of being something that I'm not suggesting it is. But I really worry that our institutions are becoming habitually pusillanimous, weak, gutless, in actually doing their job when it relates to areas around Māori spending. I mean, the whale story is obviously, the whale song story is one, but I'd point to that we have a political party that has failed in its fundamental electoral law obligations to file returns, and they still are not compliant, and the police have said, we're going to let them off with a warning. Yeah. Even though they still haven't complied. It doesn't get much more fundamental in a democracy of enforcing the basic transparency electoral law rules. Yes. And I'm reluctant to suggest, and I think it's right, had that been another party, they'd probably before the police or serious fraud office. Well, I think the Te Pāti Māori, with the Mararewa Marae, it's a serious issue. It is such a serious issue that there's data involved, there's funding involved, because their MP became an MP as a result of what happened there, and the mere fact that they had polling stations on the marae
which is where the candidate came from, who ran the marae. I mean, just things like that. And there's a soft bigotry of acceptance in the media.
That could be a good description, actually. I'm less familiar with that than I am on the electoral stuff. But it is a concern.
It's like having it's like me standing for Parliament and having the polling stations in my house. Do you know what I mean? Come on, man. Where's that? You have to be seen
or
to
at
be
least
independent.
your business.
And they have admitted that they've got that wrong, the electoral office.
But they haven't opened up an inquiry into that. They've got the Electoral Commission has a new chair, and I had hoped that Justice Moore, a retired High Court judge, who's a pretty solid guy. He was I'm sure if had he wanted it, he would have gone on to the appellate courts. I think he served actually as a temporary judge on the Court of Appeal for a while. But it is an incredible surprise that, given the findings of the Public Service Commission on that the Electoral Commission haven't opened up a sort of or ensured that there's a bit of a poke and prod on what happened. They've said things have been learned and things like that.
Yeah, it's taken too long.
On the face of it, and given how close this vote was, it does look like misjudgments by the Electoral Commission have changed the result of a seat.
I agree.
It doesn't get much more significant than that.
But even Labour's quiet on this for the very reason that they will have to do business with Te Pāti Māori if they want to govern probably next time. So they're going to have them in the mix somewhere. And they're an extremist separatist party now, in my view. And so Penny Henare, who lost the seat, is not saying much at all because for fear.
Because he's a list MP too.
He's in there.
Because there's the backdoor entry under an MP.
Yeah, the second class MP. So he's in there. He's got the salary still coming in, and what's the point of upsetting them? This is an issue now for Hipkins. The whole Māori Party approach for next year. This is where National needs to go. They need to start to say, okay, Chris, what are you going to do with these guys? Turn the tables on them.
Well, that is the big challenge. That's the big challenge for Christopher Luxon. Is he hasn't yet shown he is the person who has the ability to prosecute that case, because I think that unless the Nats can seriously pull finger on the economic side and deliver, their only pathway back to power, as far as I can see, is to prosecute that case of Hipkins' abysmal track record of everything he's touched. He's screwed up. I mean, education really has marched backwards with, and who was in charge. The public sector, who did the public sector reform? Oh, it was Chris Hipkins. The failure around, the key failure around COVID of not ordering the vaccines, despite the lying that we were the front of the queue.
Yeah, the public.
That who is there to sheet this home and remind the public of it? And
well, no one's doing it.
That's a communication challenge that the Nats really need to grapple with.
Well, who's their attack dog? I mean, this is we're going down another area now, and I know you need to go. But I mean, Shane Jones, I think, is a standout government MP at the moment for articulating the concerns around the Māori Party, and that he's really highlighting it well. He's a great orator in both languages actually, and he nails it. But who's National's dog? And John Key became very good at this. John Key Bill English became very good bringing down the dirt file and having a go. I don't see it at the moment.
It's not so much dirt. It's
truth.
It's prosecuting the case sort of thing. I mean, I agree. I mean, Shane, who would have? I think we named our government waste awards after Shane Jones. We call them the Jonesies. Who would have thought that he'd come back a decade later and be the champion for sensible economics and the like. The thing with Shane Jones is I think he's sort of got the North Star's about right. Yeah. But I'm a bit worried about his communication. He wants to be the Winston Churchill, but it was only Charles de Gaulle that talked about himself in third person.
I should say that. Never talk about yourself in third person. Never.
Yeah, and Shane does.
Yeah.
Shane always talks about. What's his term?
What's Martu Shane? Martu Shane.
Martu Shane. Yeah.
So Uncle Shane here, and Uncle Shane.
He wants to be Winston Churchill, but he's talking like Charles de Gaulle.
Well, Helen Clark did it once in a backfired. She talked about being a victim of her own success. And I remember that. I think we nicknamed her Vicky at the time. And so it just, I always think that someone is ahead of themselves when they talk about themselves third person. Just never works for me. It stands out like a beacon, you know. I'll let you go. We've said enough. I personally think that they should relieve Seymour of the job. It's been a cock up, and either cut it or redesign it in their own way if they believe in it. I don't think they believe in it.
No, this is classic National Party. We'll manage
Wussy.
Labor's policy, but do it a bit better. I mean, we've seen in Tory governments across the world that really cost them. Health being the big area where we all know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
But the Nats or the Conservative governments or the Tories around the world are so scared to touch it. And instead, they just promise we'll fund it more and try to run it a bit better. It becomes so bad at some point, reform, there's no other option. In New Zealand, its finances, they have to take tough decisions to get up productivity and put finances back in shape. And unless Simeon seriously shifts some incentives around health, I don't think even a minister that's marched down from heaven can actually run it in a way that delivers for New Zealanders.
I agree with you. If I look at the SPOS polling and everything, and the latest stuff out is cost of living is still the biggest concern, but second is now health. And health is always in and around there. Labor did well in the 90s around health. They used to highlight it in Parliament really well, prosecute it really well. And I don't know. I mean, you've seen National criticise Labor policies and take them on before. John Key, communism by stealth. That was working for families. They had to keep that. KiwiSaver, they've kept that. Kiwi Bank, they've kept that. Some things are fundamental. They can't
We've still got the 39% tax rate.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's the obvious one.
National used to stand against that. That to me, as a kid growing up, that was the difference between two parties, 33, 39.
Yeah. And this morning, Internal Affairs announced, I think, 69 jobs going, but it only scratches the surface on the actual number that it ballooned since 2017. They're actually locking in Grant Robinson's large estate rather than fulfilling their mandate of getting the books back. I mean, getting the books back into shape actually just means going back to Jacinda Ardern's big spending, well-being budget of 2019.
Yeah, look,
they're
Nicola
wussy. Willis last year, that should have been her baseline, and she literally laughed at me.
They won't do it.
I mean, when that's you're operating in.
Yeah, I'm going to leave this point. They're wusses because they're half socialist as well. And the other thing is, in their first year in office, they spent $500 million more than Labor spent in their last year in office. That's what we need to know.
Yeah, and as a percentage of GDP, the government is larger than when Grant Robinson left.
Thank you very much, Jordan. I appreciate your time. Nice to see you, mate.
Thank you, Duncan.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, so that was Jordan Williams. This is a fascinating issue now because it does go to the heart of government. The ability to be competent and look competent. So watch this space and watch what happens when Luxon gets home. Right, let's do letters to the editor. Okay, Duncan, great to see your podcast doing so well. I watched yesterday's episode and noticed the piece about the house prices in Fielding. It's ridiculous and ludicrous. In recent months, I've changed tack and decided that I don't want to pay interest to the bank at almost double the price of an already overpriced house. Would it not be smarter for people to invest in their KiwiSavers heavily until they can afford to almost buy a house outright and not just afford a deposit? Try and take the power away from the banks. Also, New Zealand can reap the benefits of KiwiSaver funds and invest in the country, as we saw with the recent New Zealand Investor Summit. I'd like to see you invite the likes of Sam Stubbs from Simplicity on at some stage to discuss this. All the best with the new podcast. If you could get your old debates going with Tova again, that would be brilliant also. Cheers, Alex. Two things. The Tova stuff won't be happening. It just can't happen. She's having a baby, isn't she? And we had Sam Stubbs on a couple of weeks ago. I agree with you. He's very good, very good. So have a look. All the podcasts are there, folks. You can just go through them. There's a shitload of material. Duncan, fellow Kiwi here, left New Zealand 15 years ago. Was earning $58,000 a year when I left New Zealand and came to Australia. Super savings as at today, $248,000. It was $256 2 weeks ago, prior to Wall Street taking a bit of a tumble. Property portfolio is $2.5 million, including primary residence at $950,000. I'm a white collar worker, reasonable salary, not a manager, just a worker. Not a flex, just a real world example. Cheers. Wow, that's interesting. You're doing better in Australia. Have to agree, Duncan, as a lifelong National supporter, probably no longer. They have not treated savers well. This is a result of last night's piece we did. Too much tax and little incentive. Yes, we are sheep and about to be shaken out of our complacency. Thanks for your podcast. Thank you for the feedback.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, that's us. Thanks so much, folks. Thanks for your feedback and your support. Get in touch with our social media at Duncan Garner Podcast on TikTok, Instagram, or flick us an email at duncan@rover.nz. Don't forget to subscribe. It really matters to us. If we want you to do one thing, that's listen, watch, and subscribe. There's 3 things. Anyway, to my team, thanks, guys. We'll do this again tomorrow. And remember, thank you, Isaac. We'll probably see you tomorrow. And remember, life isn't a dress rehearsal. There's no curtain raiser. This is it. We live in one of the best places on earth. So get out, respect it, enjoy it, and have a great rest of the day. Take care, New Zealand. Ta-da.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.